Hello there. UK and EU trade negotiators are due to sit down next Monday to restart the Brexit negotiations. But what will they be talking about? Firstly, as ever, please kick that YouTube algorithm up the jacksie by giving this video a big fat like, and I'm always uploading new content, so please do check my YouTube channel daily. Well, the programme for the second phase of Brexit trade negotiations has been published, and it looks very EU to me. Yesterday, the UK government issued the timetable for the second round of negotiations over the UK-EU future relationship, something that the global health crisis had temporarily put a halt to. The talks are to commence next Monday, the 20th of April, with a plenary session, something that all parties will attend, remotely one assumes, with wide-ranging discussions and some keynote stuff. The detailed talks proper start on Tuesday around several main strands, and some of those strands appear to come straight out of the Brussels manual on what they want to talk about and how they want the talks to progress. Now, a couple of points to note. The first is that the UK chief Brexit negotiator David Frost has been keen to reassure everyone that despite this current health problem circulating the planet, he and his opposite number Michel Barnier and their respective teams have been in contact. Legal texts have been exchanged and talks have already taken place over technicalities, he said. Also, despite all the calls from pro-EU UK politicians, mutterings from Brussels, and the appeal from the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, almost demanding that the UK go begging to the EU to extend these talks, the UK has stated quite emphatically that we will do no such thing. On this, a government spokesman said that the UK will need to have legislative and economic flexibility to recover from this current crisis, and that we will not ask to extend the transition period, and if the EU asks, we will say no. Extending the transition would simply prolong the negotiations, prolong business uncertainty, and delay the moment of control of our borders. It would also keep us bound by EU legislation at a point when we need legislative and economic flexibility to manage the UK response to this crisis. And the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, has already said that the UK is committed to the deadline of the 31st of December. So that seems clear, doesn't it? And a good job too when looking at the whole Eurozone and EU tottering on the verge of collapse. And remember that extending the talks is currently illegal under UK primary law, with absolutely no prospect of that being changed. And further, once we get to the 1st of July, it will not be an available option under the Withdrawal Agreement Treaty either. So Brexiteers can rest easy on that one, for now, but keep your beady eyes on Boris. But the issue now is that we are gearing up to negotiate a long-standing trade agreement with the EU and agree it by the 31st of December. And negotiations inevitably lead to that horrible word for Brexiteers, compromise, potentially meaning compromise on sovereignty, compromise on independence, compromise of fishing grounds, compromise on the city, compromise on Northern Ireland, and compromise on Gibraltar, etc., etc., etc. And there are two ways you can look at the word compromise. One is that it just means reaching an agreement. The other is that it compromises our position by forcing us to end up with an inferior position compared to that of when we actually went into the common market and later the EU in the first place. And that latter situation would not be acceptable. So let's take a look at this timetable and see what it holds in store for us. Bear in mind that there will be another 2 rounds of this type of thing prior to a high-level assessment meeting in June, the point at which the UK had previously been expected to beg for a Brexit implementation period extension, which is now off the table. So the talks on the individual strands start on Tuesday the 21st of April, with most running concurrently until the end of Thursday, after which there'll be a closing plenary session and a chinwag between David Frost and Michel Barnier. And what will be discussed during the Tuesday to Thursday session, you ask? Well, the top of the list appears to be trade in goods. Now, this is bread and butter stuff to the European Union. We all know that the EU sells far more goods to the UK than we sell them. So the EU negotiators will want this situation to continue, and even possibly be more EU biased. These are, after all, trade talks. Then next down the list are the negotiations on trade in services and investment and other issues. This is the one I think that the UK will be pushing hard for. Things like banking spring to mind. Then on Wednesday and Thursday we're due to talk about fisheries. This is probably of the least worth in pounds and euros to both sides, but it is a highly political and highly emotive issue. And it is also one area that we have to have done and dusted by the end of June, as it states in the political declaration we signed up to, albeit non-binding, that the parties will use their best endeavours to conclude and ratify their new fisheries agreement by the 1st of July 2020, in order for it to be in place in time to be used for determining fishing opportunities for the first year after the transition period. But as I said, although fishing is very small in economic terms compared to other industries, it takes place within our exclusive economic zone, so is politically charged. Both sides see this as a sort of litmus test for Brexit. If the UK takes back full control, the UK wins, and if the EU can keep some control, then it has won. Further, the last thing the EU wants is its French ports blockaded by angry fishermen. Now, the UK has already passed primary legislation that makes it quite clear that the UK is taking back full control of its fishing grounds. But the EU is pushing hard. It wants to maintain the current position indefinitely, where EU boats have full reign and quotas are set in their favour. Or at least have this situation for a couple of decades to gently wind down their fishing activities. And they will try and balance this off by saying they'll give the city access to their banking system as long as we agree to relinquish control over our fishing grounds, overlooking the point that they will, in all probability, need access to our banking sector to help pull them out of the current economic depression, or the Great Lockdown as the IMF likes to call it. I say, if it looks like a depression, quacks like a depression, waddles like a depression, strips workers of jobs like a depression, and ravages GDP like a depression, then guess what? It's a depression. Anyway, in my book, we don't need 2 days to talk about fisheries. We've passed a law and the quotas should be decided by the UK, and we should also decide who gets licensed to catch the fish. Then the next item on the list is the really big one for the EU. Level playing field for open and fair competition. That's for talks on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. And we all know the push there, don't we? The European Union is absolutely petrified that it will have a highly successful Singapore-on-Thames sat right on its doorstep. This is where they dismiss UK claims that what's good enough for Japan and Canada is good enough for the UK, and they claim that we are too physically close to them to be given any concessions. The EU will be utterly determined to shut down all talk on this except the UK bowing to EU rules and regulations as well as ECJ oversight. And that's probably why governance over trade is also on the agenda. I cannot believe that the UK would say anything other than a repeated no to this one. The next item on the agenda is transport, both air and road. It's in both our interests to get that one sorted, but it should be a mutual agreement through relevant transport authorities, not some sort of high-level thing where the EU demands to control our roads and airspace just because EU cars, lorries and planes use them. Something the EU would love to have, no doubt, but I can't see them being that cheeky. Or can I? And then there's law enforcement and judicial cooperation in criminal matters, which in shorthand means the UK's continued involvement in the dreaded European Arrest Warrant, or EAW. Or at least that's what the EU will want, as well as our own in-house rejoiniacs. And the EAW has led to lots of breaches of rights and would also allow the EU to reach into the UK and extract its citizens almost at will. Another one that should be destined for a big fat no. Then there's energy, including civil nuclear cooperation and governance. The EU will be pushing on this one because we are leaving both the EU and Euratom, and with the French-owned energy firm EDF owning and controlling all 7 of our nuclear reactor sites, then they have a big interest in this. And with the French connection, they'll try and push for some oversight on our civil nuclear operations. But supplementary point, how on earth did this situation ever come about? Then we're on to another biggie for the EU and our own pro-EU lobby. Mobility and social security coordination. Meaning, of course, freedom of movement of people and paying them benefits. I wondered why just last week we had thousands of unemployed UK workers turned down for farming jobs, and why plane loads of fruit and veg pickers were sent over from Eastern Europe instead. Anyway, looking at this agenda and the way it's worded, together with the laws that the UK has already passed and the known wishes of the Brussels crew, it is hard to see where they even touch, let alone give scope for agreement. So let's see what emerges. Anyway, if you want to hear more from me, please don't forget to subscribe and also press that little bell, or you won't get any notifications. And if you want to see more of me, buy a mug with my mug on it. So what do you think about the outlook for these talks? Please share and comment, and thank you for watching.